The girlies have returned.
Woohoo.
I missed you guys so much. I missed our audience so much. Welcome back to The Moment. It is a wrap-up show. We got lots going on today. Let me tell you what we got going on today. We'll be diving deep on the end of the Lindsay Clancy case. Dr. Sarah is here to tell us all about those last wrap-up arguments and postpartum psychosis. Then we'll be joined by Massachusetts attorney Catherine Loftus, aka Note My Objection, who's been out here schooling everybody on the legal process. Which, boy, oh boy, do we need, because I have thoughts about how this has scrambled our brain. But she's going to help us unpack specifically the jury's now deliberating.
Yes.
And she's going to help us understand.
I heard they just had a question.
Ooh, interesting. We're going to have to ask her about that. Well, she's going to help us understand the deliberations and what they're looking at, because jury deliberations are more complicated than you would think. Then later, if we have time, we're going to talk about Meta's $18 billion settlement for harming children on Instagram and Facebook. We're going to ask Sarah what she thinks about that. That's a huge landmark case. And they're also going around being like, hey, TikTok, YouTube, we did it. Now do it. And it's like, okay. And then finally, of course, our dearly departed Dolly Parton and Tim Curry. We're going to talk about them, but also sort of like the internet reaction and the impact on culture. I have a lot of thoughts about this. And I've been listening to Dolly nonstop. So
Oh,
there's
really?
that.
What's your favorite song?
Favorite is too hard. But right before I came in here, Light of a Clear Blue Morning came on, and that is like the happiest.
I don't know that one.
Oh, I can see.
Oh.
the
What year is that
light
from?
clear. Probably the 70s.
What was
guess.
happening? This Connecticut Queen was listening to this.
You know, actually, it's interesting. I was never really a Dolly fan until I listened to. I mean, like I was.
I know what you mean. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I listened to a show by Jad Abumrad called Dolly Parton's America, which was this incredible. I could not recommend it more. Deep dive on Dolly Parton.
From
And
Vulture?
No,
Oh,
it was
okay.
WNYC.
Okay.
He did Radio Lab. And he sort of like takes you through Dolly Parton's life and origins.
I think it's so
and uses
layered,
it.
like so much genius.
exactly-
And she just like doesn't.
No, that's exactly it. It's like he really takes you through like the incredible genius of her in place and time and anyways,
And
ever
as a businesswoman.
as a businesswoman, just like I can't recommend this series
Mind blown.
enough. And that's what turned me into a Dolly fan. Is I was like,
Oh,
now
okay.
I really appreciate what she does.
Well, I like Islands in the Streams.
Yeah, Islands in the Stream, also a good one. Also a good one.
Oh,
also,
which is
9 to
also-
5.
Also, Islands
to
in the
Five is so
Stream
good.
is what is Ghetto Superstar is a remake
Yes.
of Islands in the Stream,
Yes.
Wild.
which
Yeah.
is Ghetto Superstar is one of my favorite
Okay,
songs.
let's
the
get into
genius.
that later. Let's start with
Yeah.
something a little heavier. Lindsay Clancy trial wrapped up this week.
This case is wrapped up. It's
Okay.
obviously taken the internet by storm, and it's sort of
telling?
a cultural moment.
Yeah.
The defense and prosecution both gave their closing arguments. The defense is really, Dr. Philip Resnick is their expert, and it's all about postpartum psychosis. She did not know what she was doing when she perpetrated these acts, and of course, the defense is she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't want this life.
The
She
prosecution.
Sorry, the prosecution.
Commonwealth, yes.
The Commonwealth is she didn't want this life. She wanted to get rid of everything she's doing. And also that someone, I think a lot of misinformation around mental health. They were saying she looked great. She didn't seem like someone who's depressed or psychotic. So how could she be? Which again, I think is so problematic in terms of mental health because people can look great and still be suffering.
Well, and like if you look at Lindsay's life up to this point, she was an overachiever.
Absolutely.
So, like really strong,
A-type.
strong student, a student athlete, got a bio degree, then went and did the accelerated nursing program. I mean, this is someone who I think probably had so many times in her life where she wasn't having a mental health struggle like this.
No, but
could
she
fake
could-
it till
yes,
she could make it.
absolutely.
Multiple-
Relatable.
Well, no, but I
Absolutely,
mean, I
absolutely.
think I don't have the constitution that she had to do the things
No.
that she did younger in her life.
And
like,
this is
I mean,
such a disservice to sort of center the argument on she looked great
Right.
and she was functioning.
Can I
Because,
ask you-
yeah,
oh,
no.
I just want to ask you. I personally, in watching this all unfold, feel like not the trial itself, but the frenzy around it has been a genuine disservice to the culture, to media, to as a mental health professional, do you think this trial is a net good or net bad for mental health awareness?
I thought initially the only silver lining was everyone would know what postpartum psychosis is at the end, and I'm just left feeling like it's probably a disservice.
yeah.
And ultimately, men perpetrate these crimes so much more than women, right?
Sure.
Family annihilation. It has a name,
Yeah.
and I just think this is just such a rare occurrence, and we're not taking that into account. It's also, I think, stigmatizing women with postpartum psychosis
Or
that they-
postpartum depression.
or depression, that they can't take care of their children, that they should be separated from the children, which is just not the case. Every case that I've taken care of postpartum psychosis, there has been no harm to self or children, and 98% of cases that are treated appropriately get better.
Yeah, I
That's
think
getting lost.
I think that that's a really good point, that part of the reason why this has been so frenzied is the shock that a woman would perpetrate it, whereas like men do this all the time. Another thing that I feel sort of like icked about is I'm like, it's going to be all of this craziness on the internet, all this vitriol, all these
Yes.
like horrible feelings, and then it's going to, like, the second the jury comes out,
You think it'll
it's
go away?
it's gonna go back into the Jumanji box, like
Yeah.
suck
Yeah,
back
yeah,
in,
yeah.
and then everybody's gonna talk about it 6 to 9 months from now when Netflix comes out with a
Yes, yes,
docuseries,
yes,
and
yes,
then
yes.
never again. Like, don't you think that's exactly how this is all
Yeah,
gonna go next?
and the structural issues around this woman's desperation to get help and not getting it, I'm not hearing that being addressed
Fully
at all.
agree.
Yeah, but like, here's the thing. I feel like we do this with almost everything,
Everything. Yeah.
that
That's
happens
fair.
that affects women,
It's fair.
right? Like,
It's fair.
I
Yep.
would say 6 months ago, we couldn't stop talking about the fact that ICE had shot Renee Good.
That's a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
point,
yeah, yeah.
or,
No,
or
that's right.
Alex Peretti.
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying
is-
that
yeah.
we're not talking about those folks, but like, we have the culture has moved on
Yes.
in many ways,
Very
and
much
now
so.
ICE is surging in arrests of people with no criminal record. So
Yep.
I guess my point is, like, the media loves a moment in time, and I do think, like, I'm trying to think about the Andrea Yates case and like how basically, obviously she was found guilty,
Yes.
then they went
Yeah.
back, and what's really interesting is the people who did the testimony for the
Worked for
prosecution
this firm.
work for Park Dietz.
Wait, talk more about that.
Okay,
Talk more about
so
that.
Park Dietz is a person. He's a man.
Oh, wow.
His name is Park Dietz.
Wow,
Yes.
that sounds like a
Yes.
corporation.
It does.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he-
But like a famous expert witness.
Right. He has a firm called Park Dietz and Associates.
Okay.
And basically it employs people who consult on cases, right? And so I went on the website. There's a ton of men on this website, not many women, and they do everything. Elder care, all these different things
Yeah.
where you could have something. And not everything's going to be a murder trial,
Sure.
of course, right? And so they have consultants, but the thing that Park Dietz is really well known for is the fact that when the Andrea Yates trial happened, Park Dietz himself was the prosecution's witness, and he said that
Philip
she
Resnick was the defense's,
Right.
by the way.
and
Oh
she,
wow, they
yeah.
just repeated the same.
Well, there's like no one, like they can't find another
It's-
fucking person.
no,
it's
it
a
is.
whole
That's
other thing.
another issue.
Interesting,
Um,
yeah.
So basically, what he did was he said, she copied an episode of Law and Order. And can you tell us
That he apparently consulted on but was never made.
Yeah.
Wait,
So never existed.
So he was like, she
was-
saw this episode of Law and Order,
And it influenced her to do this.
but there was no episode of Law and Order to exist. So he got in, like, when that all came out, and her conviction was, I think, not
but then
how wasn't he not
overturned?
held
not,
in
like,
contempt?
sort of overturned. Like, I mean, because she was found like not criminally responsible,
Right, right,
essentially.
right.
So
Wait,
he-
but how was he not held in contempt of court? Isn't that
They
lying
didn't know
under
at the
oath?
time. Or I don't know if no one fact checked.
No,
Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't that-
no one fact checked.
well, here's the thing: Park Dietz ain't sitting on the stand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
Right.
his people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Those
Right.
who can't do teach, right? Like, so it's,
It's
like
his people, and
it's
let
his
me just
people.
tell you, no one was an expert in postpartum
Mm-hmm.
psychosis. I think one of them, Reddington asked, when have you seen someone with postpartum psychosis? And he said maybe 1 or 2 cases in the 80s and 90s.
Jesus.
Well, and I guess that's my point. So with Andrea Yates, one of the things that people kept saying to me is like, no one cared about the Andrea Yates case the way we care about this case. And I was like,
I
right.
think
We didn't
you
have
know,
the
we didn't have
internet.
internet.
it was different, but I think people were.
I mean, we cared.
it's a household. It became a household
It
name.
was, but we were living in such different times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Like, Andrea Yates happened in June of 2001. What happens in September of 2001?
Yeah.
Everything changes, everything shifts.
Yeah.
9/11 terrorism, the
Yeah.
war, those became the big stories. And so
Yeah.
I'm just like, with this Lindsay Clancy case, just like Andrea Yates, which ends up getting overturned, we are, I think, gonna like move on really quick to
Totally.
fucking Lake of America.
Lake of America.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's just going to
100%.
But
I
it's
think
interesting it's resonating so much when in a time where I think there's this desire to oppress women in this country and their voice and and I think in some ways gaslight them.
I will say, though, on the other hand, part of what I think is really interesting and is the amount of women that I've seen in comments, like talking about their own personal experiences with abuse, and as much as I'm like 100%, like that's really important. And I'm like, I do think that women are projecting their own
I think they can
experiences
see
onto this
themselves
trial.
in this.
Yes.
And I think there's something good about that of like this is not a monster. This is
Right.
humanizing of like this can happen to anyone who delivers a baby and it's very scary and you feel very out of control.
Yeah.
You know, Lindsay is in a wheelchair, and I just keep thinking about what will be the type of care that she will receive in a prison. I mean, in Massachusetts, I hate to say this is probably some of the best prison care you're going to
Yes.
get in the country, right?
Yeah.
Like compared to what I see in places like, you know, Alabama, et cetera. But, you know, I just can't see how she could survive living in like a type of, it would be like a hospitalized prison,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, but like, you know, with
Her
those kind of
quality of life
will be,
injuries,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And also what we know she enjoyed doing in her life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It sounds like she's a very active person, that this is going to be very difficult. What do we think about how the jury's composed? Lots of women.
Well, I think it's a great time to
9
bring
women.
in our guest because I think she, there are a lot of women. I'm
Yeah,
not
9 women and 3 men. I'm curious how
That
the
could
voir
backfire.
dire went. It could backfire. Well, it's interesting because so in a trial they do something called voir dire at the beginning before it starts, where the lawyers are allowed to sort of like throw people out. And so, for example, I remember in Tsarnaev, if you were like called up for jury duty and you came on the or you came on the stand and you said, I don't believe in the death penalty, then you could not serve on the jury. Like for me personally, I
Great.
don't believe in the death
me
penalty.
neither.
They would have said, you
Get
can't, this is a death penalty case. You would have to be somebody who would be able to juggle those things. And so I wonder, I'm curious in the voir dire, and I'm sure there were, you know, reporters there, and I'm sure we could look it up, like what they were looking at for these different jury members.
Can you imagine if you sat through this entire trial and then you get picked as an alternate?
oh my God.
That happened to a friend of mine.
Okay, Seinfeld. This is very Seinfeld.
She was on a huge case. Catherine probably remembers this case. It was a Harvard grad student who had stabbed a kid in Cambridge.
Oh, I think I remember.
It was a
this
huge case.
Yeah.
And here's what's crazy. They found the Harvard grad student not guilty. And my friend, who was an alternate, she was like, oh, I was definitely going to find him guilty.
Oh.
And I would have never, ever agreed to finding him not
Interesting.
guilty.
And then
So
it would have been a hung jury.
Exactly. And so anyway, I just think like, but her whole thing was she was like, oh my God, this was like 2 months of my life.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
then you write a book about it.
Corey. Okay. Oh my God, I shouldn't have said her name. Sorry. Here to unpack how the jury will actually decide this case and the last minute addition of manslaughter, which I think is very interesting as
Yeah.
a potential outcome for this case, we have one of my favorite creators, attorney Catherine Loftus, former Boston prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney and the host of Note My Objection, a legal and political analyst show. Catherine, we're so happy you're here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Girls, I should
treat.
say.
Do you remember that case of the grad student?
Yeah, I think it was if I'm correct, someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Alexander Pring Wilson. And it was, it was a really interesting case. It sort of hinged on culpability and state of mind and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was probably a good 10, 15 years ago.
Oh yeah,
at
it was
this
ages
point.
ago.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you back and we'll unpack some more
Yes,
famous
please
Boston
Yeah,
do.
now we
cases,
have
but-
our legal correspondent.
Um,
We found the best legal
I know. I'm
correspondent.
so.
I love
By
that.
the way, my family is beyond excited that you're here. You have no idea. I was like, I told my sister, I'm like, I think this is like getting Catherine on the show is the most you've ever been impressed with me in my entire life.
I
So-
also
I
think
feel
that,
I
like,
feel so special.
now especially, like, the internet has just been such a dark place with this trial, and there's so much misinformation about how the court system works.
Yep.
I just think you've been great, and I'm really excited. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
so
go.
let me ask you this. How would you describe what the jury is actually looking at right now? And how do you think they will deliberate these many potential sentences that they have.
Yeah, so I think it got a little bit more complicated when the Judge Sullivan decided to add the manslaughter instruction.
Who
So
asked
they
for that, by the way?
Why did that
Kevin
happen?
Reddington asked for it. The defense asked for it.
Oh.
Yeah, the defense asked for it because I mean it's definitely not something normally that a DA's office would ask for, particularly in this type of case. You know, there is certain obviously every single case is specific to the facts in its of itself, and you can't really generalize what's going to happen. Sometimes the Commonwealth will ask for a lesser included of manslaughter. In a case where 3 children were strangled to death, it's usually not going to be something that they ask for. But I think what Kevin Reddington was doing and asking for it, and really Judge Sullivan, and given the instruction, was giving the jury a potential out, because there is a very high likelihood that the jury gets stuck if they only have first degree, if they only have second degree, or are not guilty by due to lack of criminal responsibility. The likelihood of a hung jury goes up. In a manslaughter, as much as I don't think that this is actually manslaughter.
Yeah, how does the manslaughter make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, first degree murder is essentially premeditation or extreme atrocity or cruelty. Second degree murder is essentially an intentional homicide, but takes away those premeditation or extreme atrocity prongs. And manslaughter is essentially wanton or reckless conduct, and you can talk about diminished capacity. And so we see it in instances where it's more, accidental. If there's something
like I
that
misused the exercise band and it harmed my
Or I
child.
hit someone
someone
with a
with a car.
car.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right. So, I mean, from a legal perspective, this really is most appropriately charged as a first degree murder. But I think given the complexities of sort of the underlying issues, which is this isn't just a homicide of 3 children. There are the complications of her mental health, the fact that, she otherwise really was not somebody involved in the criminal justice system. She was a normal mom. And so those are things that most juries in most homicide cases are not going to be considering. And because I think they're worried about a hung jury and potentially having to do this again, they really put the manslaughter on the table as like saying to the jury, almost like, here's your out, because this is, it gives, it allows the jury to hold her responsible. There is a real potential prison sentence that comes with it. But at the same time, there's, it's not a straight guilty on a first degree murder. So they have a lot to think about because they have a lot of options. And I expect they're going to be thinking about it at least probably into the beginning or middle of next week.
Okay, yeah, we were wondering about that.
Yeah. What do you think a manslaughter charge could come back with in terms of a sentence?
So you can be sentenced up to 20 years on a manslaughter, and obviously there's 3 counts. So theoretically, her liability for potential exposure is up to 60 years. Now,
Okay.
generally you don't get, that means you'd have to serve concurrent sentences. That's up to the judge, right? So the judge gets to decide whether they are consecutive sentences, which means you could have 3 sentences of 20 years served consecutively, which means you really just get one 20-year sentence. Or you can stack them concurrently, which means 20 plus 20 plus 20. So it could be up to 60. I think in this case, he'd probably split the baby. I think there would have to be a real substantive sentence, maybe somewhere in like the 15 to 30 range that gives people sort of like okay, we have a real consequence here. We have a real sentence here, but we're not going to punish her for the rest of her life without parole as if, like we would somebody else who didn't have these sort of, mitigating circumstances, which is really her mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about so they're looking at all these different things, it's not as straightforward as you think what they're looking at. Can you what do you think they're deliberating in the jury room? What do you think they're looking at in terms of what they saw in the case? What do you think they're actually deliberating and how they're looking at their decision-making process?
Well, I think it's interesting in this case because guilt is really not an issue, right? It's essentially been conceded throughout the trial. Obviously the Commonwealth still has the burden of proving she did it, but I think we pretty easily meet that prong given that they've conceded that she committed these crimes. So we're really just going to what her state of mind was in the moment that she took the lives of her 3 children. And so I think what the jury is going to be looking at is, and there's a lot. It was 5 weeks of trial. Is
Yeah.
what did she look like up to and until, late August, early September? What happened after September? And we have seen, multiple doctors, nurses who essentially have all come to the same conclusion that she was very sick. She continued to get worse. She was on and off medication. And the ultimate question for the jury is going to be not whether she was sick, because that seems to have been a foregone conclusion. Everybody really is on the same page. But what was her mental state in that exact moment? So, in order to, in Massachusetts, the standard is different for a lack of criminal responsibility defense. In most states, the defendant actually has to prove that they were not of sound mind. In Massachusetts, once you plead that defense, the burden is actually on the prosecution to prove that they were of sound mind. So the Commonwealth has to prove that she knew what she was doing in that moment, which is, again, why we get back to the manslaughter, because I think that a lot of jurors, I think there will be some jurors who think, yes, she was really sick, but some of her behavior that day, sort of the timeline, the sending him out, the calling Patrick back, will go to that her mental status was that she could conform her actions to the law. And I think some others will say, like, how can we separate that? So it's really, really difficult. It's probably the most difficult question a jury can deliberate on is to get into someone's mind.
Catherine, a question I have for you is why Reddington started bringing up sort of poking holes in Patrick's testimony, the residue, was it an antipsychotic or not? How did you know? Oh, Patrick says, like, what was the point of that if it's a foregone conclusion?
I think more of it was, that number one, you always, as a defense attorney, are going to attack any holes in a investigation, right? So like that is like standard sort of 101. If there are any problems, even if you've essentially conceded that the ultimate, conclusion that she committed these crimes is there, you're still going to say, hey, you know what? You didn't test the cup. You didn't test what the crushed up pills were. And maybe that could have gone to, there was a ton of, medication in there. So that goes to her mental state. And so it's really just trying to poke holes. Essentially, in some ways, sort of in his closing argument in the last few days of testimony in the cross-examination of the witnesses, he was really trying to throw everything at the wall. I think you want to put as much doubt into the jury's mind as possible. And if you can say, hey, they didn't even test A, B, C, and D, so how can you possibly know? Then the benefit goes to the defendant.
One of the things that I thought yesterday when I watched closing remarks
arguments
was that, and I've really been like very much Kevin Reddington has done an amazing job. I've had a lot of issues with the prosecution, but when I watched those two closing arguments, I felt that the prosecution had one of their strongest moments of the entire trial, and that Kevin Reddington lost the plot a little bit for the first time. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to swing the jury, but I was curious from your perspective, what did you see from those closing arguments? Have I lost my mind?
No, I don't think so. I haven't had a similar sort of reaction. I think that, if you sort of think about winning the battle versus winning the war, I think Kevin Reddington, for the most part, the majority of the trial, he was on the front end, and the Commonwealth was really on its heels. We didn't really understand where are they going with some of these questions. Their theory didn't seem to make sense.
Agreed.
And it sort of switched in closing arguments. And what happened, I think, for me was, I think the last couple of days of testimony with the Commonwealth's rebuttal witnesses, Reddington for the first time probably felt a little bit vulnerable because they presented, the psychiatrist, the behavioral analyst, and the psychologist before that. I'm forgetting their names and I would probably mispronounce them anyway. But they really sort of got down to like, yes, she was really sick, but she knew what she was doing. And I think that they were effective. And that sort of probably threw him off a little bit. And I think that was reflected in his closing argument. It did not seem cohesive to me. I think the substance of a lot of the points he was making were legitimate, but you sort of had to pull them out. There wasn't a cohesive timeline. And that's in contradiction to the prosecution, who I think for the first time in the entire case did a really, really good job.
I mean,
Jennifer
really
Frog
good job was the right choice.
But didn't they, their closing argument conflicted with their opening?
Yes, yes. And so I think that's the question, right? So, like I say, in terms of head to head, the closing arguments, I would give the win certainly to the Commonwealth. The question is, there are going to be jurors who, some of them pay attention, some of them take some notes. And so that closing might be persuasive to them. And then you're going to have other jurors who are probably like us, who think about, well, wait a second, everything
Said she
you're
hated
saying in
her life and
closing-
didn't want it right.
Right.
is now in contradiction to what you have essentially presented the whole time. And really, I think, given the fact there's 9 women on the jury,
Yeah.
that both of the prosecutors were quite unkind and at times cruel in the way
Yeah.
they
Yes.
when it witnesses Patrick Clancy, Sue Clancy, the way they presented evidence with Lindsay in the courtroom. It almost gave the feeling to me like, oh, so you can be nice, you just chose not to this
Mhm.
entire time, which
Mhm.
I don't know how that will sit. But ultimately, this is the really interesting thing about a jury, is that it's made up of all different kinds of people. So some people might, look at it and think like, well, I don't like that. And others might say like, well, you know what? I didn't know where they were going, but she wrapped it up pretty well. And now I see her point.
Before we let you go, I'm curious. There's been on the internet a huge sort of like Patrick Clancy, conspiracy what I think are conspiracy theories. What do you think happens next, depending on how she's found? Does Patrick, are there new investigations into them? How does this affect their civil case against the medical practitioners? I wonder how you think.
And reminder, they are 2 separate civil cases. Patrick has a civil case, and
she has
Lindsay
one.
has a civil case.
That's right.
That's right.
So I'm just curious what you think about one
Insurance payouts.
Well, I'm just curious what you think about one, what transpired in terms of how Patrick Clancy was sort of brought into this on the internet narrative, and 2, what happens depending on how she's found in the next, week or whatever.
I mean, I think no matter what happens with the jury, that's the end of it, because the Commonwealth believes that Lindsay Clancy did this. She doesn't, they
don't have any
listen,
alternate. Yeah.
They don't have any, no. And as I talked a lot about this actually when I covered the Karen Reed case, but that we actually don't want a system generally where the prosecution tries someone, and if they don't get the result they want, they go like, let's look
Right.
around and see who else we can go. Sometimes you win cases and sometimes you don't. You put the best case forward. So after this, I mean, nothing is going to happen in terms of any criminal accountability or liability, like anything like that for Patrick Clancy. As you said, there are 2 civil cases in Superior Court against the practitioners and the hospitals. One is Lindsay's, one is Patrick. So I think we'll see those sort of proceeding in the normal course, which is, slow, probably going to take a couple of years. But this will really be sort of the end of it. And, I think it's what this has turned into, and I would agree, I think this is largely conspiracy theories and things like that, is that, it's a lot of people have interest in the criminal justice system. A lot of people like watching trials, but you also don't see in a trial, you just get what is presented to prove this person guilty, right? You don't see the 3 years of investigations and the pretrial motions and the hearings and what has been happening before that.
Mhm.
You only see the case that really it's the best of what the Commonwealth wants to put forward. And so I think there's sort of this idea that Patrick wasn't investigated or things weren't looked at. And I don't think that's actually reflected in the facts of the case. It's just that Patrick's not on trial. So we're not talking about, how they ruled him out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Last question that I have for you right before you go, I do have to ask. The last 3 years, all eyes have been on Plymouth County and Massachusetts over the summer for these cases. It's actually like, I feel like at Logan, where right now it's like probably like visit Rockport. Like it's probably like visit where the Karen Reed trial happened. I do have to
what's
ask
going
you,
on?
like,
What's in the water?
You're a Massachusetts gal. I'm a Medford gal.
Yep.
What the fuck do you think is happening? Because like we are now on summer 3 of huge Massachusetts cases, a state that like
That's so
has such good, like we have the top institutions in the world
Yeah.
for law school. We have top attorneys like you and Kevin Reddington. How are we here?
And media wise
Right.
too. Like
Yeah.
they're always like big
Boston
media cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is going on?
Right. Well, I think it's interesting. I have lots of thoughts. It's hard to be concise.
We'll
about
have to
it,
have
but
you back.
Yeah.
It's a combination of, there's a general lack of mistrust sort of in society as a whole, right? And then we have, Massachusetts, we're very educated. We're very protective of defendants' rights. We have all these sort of like, institutions. But at the same time, it is sort of this like old school kind of place where, there's sort of the boys club and things like that. And so I think we see a lot of things happening at the same time, with the state police in Karen Reed in Norfolk County, and then in Lindsay Clancy, we have other trials coming up with the state police. There, multiple individuals have been indicted by the United States Attorney's Office, and there's a real lack of sort of standards, lowering of standards. And at the same time, I think, really over the past 5-10 years, we have seen such a sort of a change in perception of how people think about police and, the behaviors. And so I also think we're not attracting a lot of good police officers because it sort of works on both
I think
sides.
that's nationwide.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really interesting.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the
you
bottom
know,
of the barrel.
Yes.
not.
And so therefore it's like when those police officers are investigating cases, it's like, yeah, they're not the cream of the crop that maybe they used to be. So
That's so
I think there's a
interesting.
lot to critique. I also think that a lot of issues sort of were maybe over inflated as to like what the actual problems are. But that's sort of when you get the combination of, corruption and then online trials, it's sort of
And it drives
and-
clicks, right? Like I think
Exactly.
that's
I
the thing
wanna
to
know.
remember is like this all drives clicks. You
Why
guys, there
do
are
they
people out there who
televise
I
these?
totally think have taken stances on this trial that I'm like, oh, I
Just for
don't think
the
that's
clickbait,
that's
yeah.
for the clickbait. That's for the
Yeah.
fucking clickbait.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Why are they? I know that we have to let you go, but why did they decide to televise this? I used to work I was at WBUR. I used to be like a Boston media girly, and I'm like, I get it, but also like, this seems bad for our brains. Like, couldn't somebody have been like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't televise this wall to wall?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I mean, after covering Karen Reed, which at least there was sort of a base of like the craziness that came from there, even if, like I said, I think a lot of it was not entirely accurate, but I never expected to see what we saw in the Clancy case. I really
Yeah.
thought we were going to be spending the month talking about postpartum issues
Yes,
and
yes.
women's health and all that. Instead, it was like, I'm in the comments, like fighting for my life, trying to say like, let's look at the issues that we have here.
Yeah.
But, I think, I honestly think I'm not against cameras in the courtroom, but I think we have to reconsider how we do it. This idea of live streaming everything,
inappropriate.
it's sort of like
Yeah.
spectator sport.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't know that it's good for the actual system. And
Fully
and,
agree.
Yeah. So, it's a conversation certainly to be had.
Totally.
Well,
agree.
Catherine Loftus,
Yeah.
please remind everybody where they can find you.
You can find me everywhere. Note my objection, literally on every single,
that
anywhere
handle.
that
Yeah, it's so
people
good.
exist, I'm there. Substack.notemyobjection.com. And thanks for having me on. I really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank
We're
you.
back. We're
Love
obsessed with
this.
you. Thank
Yes.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend.
You too.
Okay, this is like very niche, but do you guys remember when the Michael Jackson trial was happening in like
course.
2004?
I
And
just watched the documentary on
well,
it.
cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
That made sense.
So like they would
Yeah.
sketch.
Yeah.
But then I believe it was Entertainment News, like hired a bunch of like F-list actors
No.
who would reenact the trial at night. Like they would
Wow.
put it out that
But
same
maybe
day.
that would be better.
What we did in the Tsarnaev trial, so in federal court you can't have cameras. It's like a
Right.
state court versus federal court.
Yeah.
And during the Tsarnaev
That's why
trial,
we never see Trump.
that's right, exactly. And
That
during the
would
Tsarnaev
have
trial,
would've
what
been
we
helpful.
did, and this was like a different era, they would do a daily podcast where
Yeah,
I
yeah.
forget
Like a
their name.
rundown.
They
Yeah.
would do like a
But
rundown.
receiving news that way is so much
much
better for your
better.
nervous system.
Totally.
It's better for your nervous system, and it's better. It's like it's filtered through somebody.
Yeah, and then you
who's a
don't have like,
professional.
astrologers saying, here's what I read when I see Patrick on the stand.
Totally.
Yeah, anyway, I just think yes, I agree with you, but I don't want to bring back a TV show that airs every night where people reenact.
No. Well, I think that the thing with the Lindsay Clancy case is had they not done just the live stream of it, only nerds would be interested in it. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't have gotten
Like scholars of the law and
scholars
maybe
of the law,
mental health.
people locally in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
People who are
care
really
about
interested
maternal
in
mental health,
maternal mental
yeah,
health.
yeah,
I don't think it would have been this like internet frenzy.
Yeah, it just feels like a.
I think it being summer too, like it's
TV
summer,
show.
the
That's
news
a good
is
point.
slow. Politics hasn't ramped up for the midterms yet.
So
I think
true.
if this was happening like mid-October, it would be.
Competing.
I always talk to people about Chandra Levy.
Yeah.
And Chandra Levy, every time you turned on the TV, all you saw was Chandra Levy. She was a
That's
woman that went missing in Rock
Yes.
Creek Park,
Clintons.
jogging.
Yes, yes,
late,
yes, yes.
Speaking of conspiracy
2001.
theories.
Yes.
And
Right? Isn't
Gary
No.
Condit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
not the Clintons. But
Okay.
anyway, she was having an affair with a Republican
Yeah.
congressman.
Okay.
And it had ended. But anyway, long story short, every time you turn on the TV, and then 9/11 happens, and I never saw
Gone.
Chandra Levy again.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is like this. I also think has really Molly McPherson talked about this. It caught us at this very interesting
Yes.
moment.
Also, journalism and media is so complicated because there's parts of journalism, or I think the practice of journalism done best is about public service and like mediating analysis and facts and
Oh,
then
yeah, but-
there's media as a capitalist business
Oh,
and that's
100%.
about eyeballs and selling advertisements and audience.
Which is interesting. This meta settlement is about children, and we may not have time to talk about it. But in some ways, I think this is so addictive, and I can see this in the Lindsay Clancy, right?
Let's
it's
do
the
it
never-ending
super quick.
infinity
No,
scroll.
I think we should talk about
Let's
it.
do it super quick.
Okay, so, Meta had agreed to pay $18 billion to settle a landmark case brought by the U.S. states accusing Facebook and Instagram of deliberately designing addictive features that harm children and teens. The deal resolved claims from 48 states, D.C., and 3 U.S. territories, and it's Meta's largest ever payout related to child safety. It is tremendous. I think it's a huge precedent of like, well, they're open to lawsuits. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I thought it was so interesting that they called out TikTok and YouTube.
Yes.
In other words, I think it's
I
a
thought
net
they were in
good.
other cases too. I don't know what happened.
Which,
Like there was other cases against those
I'm
companies.
sure there are. I'm sure
Maybe they
there are.
settled already.
I'm
but
sure they are. But I think to make it be like, hey, it's not just a Meta problem, it's an everybody problem.
I think this is really important because before it was like it's a parent problem. Try to hold off your kid
Right.
from getting a phone, and I think this is like a reflection of like actually this is bigger than just an individual parent. This
Right.
is a public health issue.
Do you think it's like smoking?
Yes. Yes.
Like, it's like-
and I actually think
it-
it's for adults too. I mean,
Yeah,
the settlement's
no,
just for
totally. I
children.
mean, like, I think it's like one of those things where it's like in the beginning, people were like, well, just don't smoke. And it's like,
Right.
okay, but like the ads are targeting
They're just
kids.
Yeah.
Like the
Yes.
Marlboro
Yes,
Man
yes,
is for
yes,
kids.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's like that. But I also think, you know what I think? I think this is an economic issue.
Say more. You always, this is your.
Everything is an economic issue. The reason that we have to have these cell phones and kids have to have access like that to them is the fact that in a two-parent household, mom and dad both have to work, and
Yeah.
everything is so much harder. And it's just so different than it was 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. Okay. We create these technologies that we make people rely on.
Yes.
And we say to parents, like, hey, everything's on the Facebook group, or, like,
Or schools being like
Yeah.
infiltrated
Right.
with like Google
Yes.
Classroom and all this stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
And part of it's they're like, this is going to make your life easier.
doesn't.
And it doesn't.
And the test scores just go. Bloop.
Right. And it's like we have created this culture where it is so much harder to just take care of your kids.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting it on the parents of like, you're not watching them hard enough. I'm like,
No.
no. This is that we're
But
not
as a
being
culture, there needs to be more sort of like parents looking out for each other. I went to Copenhagen a couple weeks ago. The parks
Yeah.
in this place, the thoughtfulness around children. Restaurants have playgrounds, not just McDonald's.
Right.
It's like all these places are like this is to help take care of your children and kind of doing it as a community.
But also, can I throw out just like to like circle the wagons here is what happened in this case is Meta was found of deliberately
Right.
creating
Yeah,
things
right.
That were
to harm
addictive,
children.
right.
Right.
So it's like totally agree. There's like a problem in our culture and society about like how much phones have infiltrated
Yeah.
and whatnot. But like what was decided in this case was that Meta on purpose with their engineers
Well,
decided
yeah.
to do things to keep
because when
children
there
in
isn't
the algorithm.
regulation,
Period.
right? Like
Period.
they're gonna do whatever gets them the most profit.
Yeah.
Oh God, everyone in the chat is fighting about when Chandra Levy disappeared. I'm
Oh,
like, "Guys,"
jeez.
Someone's like, she died on 9/10/2001. I'm like, I don't think that's true.
Bring back Chandra Levy.
Oh,
Bring back
Jesus.
like now that the Lindsay Clancy case
Was that
is
never
over,
solved?
No, it was
was,
solved, but there's a
She
lot
was,
of like
running in the park. or
she was
something?
running in the. It was a very sad
Yeah.
sad story, and obviously, I think it was, but it was also sort of like, God, like our television media landscape just loves like a missing white woman. That was
Totally.
also
Oh, yeah.
part of it.
Oh,
yes.
And like it was because
Or a murderous
Monica
white woman.
Lewinsky had been this huge thing, and then they were like, oh my god, this is another intern who had an
Yes,
affair.
yes,
And
yes,
it's like,
yes.
They were looking for the next one.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
Let's end on a lighter
let's
note.
end on a
I mean,
lighter
sort of a
note.
lighter note. I do think it's a lighter note because these,
Yes.
two major losses this week in
Icons.
entertainment. Yeah, Dolly Parton, Tim Curry. Just like, I don't know. I think I have a lot of thoughts about both of these people, but in terms of like things that are sad, I'm like, these are two people who like lived a life and then
Yes.
died old and beloved by their
But,
friends
like,
and
kinda
family.
young. I don't know. Dolly was only 80.
Dolly was only 80,
That
but
doesn't
like,
feel.
yeah. Dolly was only 80. Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed on the internet, we've talked about this yesterday, that has like just warmed my heart is the amount of people in my feed that are just like these random women from Tennessee with like 800 to 1,000 followers, like not famous women, not women who are trying to be famous, who have pictures of them with Dolly and these like, my Aunt Dolly
Ugh,
tributes.
Love
And you're
that,
like, wow,
love
this
that.
really was a woman who like,
Like
it's not
couldn't have her own children because of endometriosis, was vocal about it,
Yep.
and yet like was so giving and generous
and
and,
not
mothering.
just, like I knew she was Miley Cyrus's godmother, and it's like,
Oh, she's acting like her real godmother.
she's her real godmother, and you're like, okay, I get it,
That's
celebrities
cool.
with celebrities, but what
Yeah.
I've loved is that she was the genuine godmother, and
To
like
so
you could see
many.
to so many.
Her likability score also, I saw something. It's like off the charts, more than Obama, more
I
than
believe
Taylor
it.
Swift. And it's like, I think it's an example of like, you can stand for things. You don't have to be totally neutral and you can still be really well liked. I think authenticity seems to be like,
Well, and what's so interesting about her is like she was both deeply political because of the social causes she chose.
Yeah.
And also, like, you could not get a political statement out of her, period. Like, she never once commented on Trump himself.
Right.
She never joined the Obamas in any like Oprah, all these people usually in some way or another participate in the politics of politics. Dolly Parton distinctly
like in actions in everyday.
in action, like in her support
is
of
so
the
more
trans and
meaningful. Yeah,
LGBTQ
yeah.
community, in vaccines, in children's literacy, in advocacy for rural
This is great.
Appalachia. Like,
It's like the literacy is the opposite of what Med has done for children.
Totally.
Kept a whole generation illiterate, but Dolly has, hopefully helped a lot of children.
so one take that really resonated with me, that's like a little bit more sad, that I thought was really interesting, is writer Tressie McMillan Cottom, who she writes for the New York Times.
I
a
love
lot.
her.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. She posted an Instagram reel where she was saying sort of what I was saying, which is like, when these sort of like older people pass, it's sad, but generally you're like, okay, well, like that's what
Yeah, to
happens
life, yeah.
in life.
Yeah.
She pointed out, and I agree, is I think part of our underlying grief that we all feel as a culture is we can feel that because of class issues, because local communities are being decimated, because all of our lives are filtered through these algorithms,
Yeah.
there's not space for the next Dolly Parton. I feel like we're not like, as a culture, making space
No.
for the next Dolly Parton. And so when we say goodbye to a great genius like Dolly Parton, it's not just like, oh, this light.
Will there be another?
Yeah, it feels like we don't have.
I think a lot of people think it's Taylor Swift.
It's not.
I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying I think that's what a lot of people think.
They might, but even still, like it's
It's
like, then who's the next tail? Like it just doesn't feel like our culture has the space
Mm-hmm.
for a true original to come up from
The generosity, the
poverty.
authenticity, it's just
and to
unmatched.
like she was such, like I said, Dolly Parton's America. What was so interesting is she was a genius at music, like truly a genius the way that Mozart was a genius, but she was also a genius at show business. And you're like, this woman who grew up in a one-room
nothing. Yes.
shack
Yes.
in Tennessee with her, I believe, 10 siblings, to be like, to have that level of gift, you're like, that's what genius
I mean, to say
is.
no to Elvis is like
Yeah, she
the
was-
ultimate.
And I mean, I will always
Like dating.
No. Rights to
Rights to a
I will
song.
always love you. Actually,
Oh.
and she
Yeah.
kept
I
them,
mean,
and she
that's even
Yeah.
smarter than dating.
made bank.
Well, and that's what she did. And I Will Always Love You was about Porter Wagner, which is where she started her career on his show.
Oh,
and she
when she
ended up
left.
leaving
Yeah,
him
yeah.
for very similar reasons. And she wrote this song that was like as gracious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like imagine being that gracious to
Also,
somebody
love
that you're
Whitney
also
Houston
like,
can get all of the credit for this, but like I want all the money in the bank.
That's,
is
well,
what
and
she's
that's exactly what
saying.
you should listen. It's worth listening to this series, Dolly Parton's America, because it's just such a rich series, like in terms of like understanding her in this. But exactly that, where it's like Whitney Houston made that song was not famous.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston made that song a cultural moment. It won her a Grammy, all
Yeah,
these
yes,
things.
yes.
But Dolly Parton was like, and
Yeah.
Dollywood, here
And I
we
love
come.
in this package of like sequins and platinum blonde hair and you know and
Totally.
big breasts and just like what people would consider just like maybe not the smartest
Well,
and she's genius.
So
And
one
wouldn't
other thing
change
you
herself.
learn is that she built her image off of basically a sex worker local in town in
Love
Tennessee.
that.
She saw this woman and she was like, "That's what beauty looks like to me." And her mother was like, "That's a tramp.
Aw.
Don't do that." And Dolly was like, "Nope, this is
I
what
like
I
it.
want. This
Yeah.
is what I want to do."
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like she was always sort of in on the joke. Like she truly was. I don't know how
Almost
to
like-
describe it. It's like a real genius. And then also Tim Curry.
Yeah.
Tim Curry, who also like they're also sort of these two queer icons,
yes,
at
yes,
a time
yes,
when
yes.
like queer icons now super important. We're in a really tough moment, but like Tim Curry in the 70s and 80s, and like you didn't really know what was going on with him. You know what I mean? Like it's not like
Yeah.
he was like out
yeah,
per
yeah,
se,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he also like you just kind of knew. Also loved Muppet Treasure Island. Big
Yes,
Muppet
so
Treasure
good.
Island fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, this has been such a fun episode.
Yeah.
We will be back on Tuesday.
We sure will.
As always, just a friendly reminder, you can follow us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel.
We
It's
sure
linked
do.
in my bio. And so if you're watching on TikTok right now or YouTube or whatever you're on,
Wherever you are, we are.
head over and follow us on YouTube because we're really close to getting our subscriber number up to our goal. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Ooh.
you guys, thanks so much.
It's so good to be
and,
back.
It's
ladies.
great
The
to be
fall
back.
is coming.
All right. Thank you. Bye.